Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C Dot that knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. You know, it's really sad that when the worst film a company makes is because it's just bland and forgettable. As I stated last time, I had a hard time trying to find a film that was based on a DC Comics character that wasn't as terrible as people made it out to be. But it was even harder to find the worst film that DC Comics had made, since there are several out there that I could have chosen. Movies like Catwoman or Supergirl were definitely up there as the worst of all time, but instead I went with the one character that nobody wanted to see on the big screen or even see him get adapted. The movie I'm talking about stars the basketball legend Shaquille O'Neal as he attempts to play the hero, Steel. The origins of Steel's creation date back to one of the most popular Superman comics of all time, The Death of Superman. Spoilers to those who haven't read the sequel to this story. After Superman's death, several different heroes showed up in Metropolis claiming to be Superman reincarnated. One of those heroes was a scientist named John Henry Irons, who was saved by Superman, after which Irons was inspired to take up the mantle of Superman after he died. Once the real Superman came back, Irons decided to change his identity to Steel, having a suit of steel, a cape, and carrying a giant hammer along with various other gadgets. The movie was commissioned by Warner Brothers after two music producers, Quincy Jones and his partner David Salzman, wanted to bring the character to film, especially Mr. Jones, having a personal reason to make him a role model for kids of the 90s. The film was panned by critics and audiences, saying that it was too episodic and had too many superhero cliches, only making back less than a third of its budget at $1.7 million against a $16 million budget. The story follows a weapons designer named John Henry Irons, played by Shaquille O'Neal, as he is testing weapons for the military when another soldier named Nathaniel Burke, played by Judd Nelson, wants to show off the full power of Irons' weapon and instead ends up causing massive damages and injures Irons' partner, Sparky, played by Annabeth Gish. After a court-martial, Burke is dishonorably discharged and Irons leaves the army and his weapon-making days to return home and start a new life. However, once Irons returns home, he finds out that his weapons are being sold on the black market. Can Irons put a stop to the crime spree going on in his city? Will he be able to take on these gangs as the city's new hero, Steel? This is where the biggest problem with the movie starts. Let's start things off with the main lead, Shaquille O'Neal. If you never grew up in the 90s, one thing that was popular for filmmakers to do was have sports stars as main leads in children's films. Everyone from Hulk Hogan to Michael Jordan, sports stars had to be in everything just so that they could make more money, and most of them couldn't act to save their careers. Let's take a relatively popular superhero character like Steel and have him be played by a basketball star whose last movie included the magical wonder of Kazam. Suffice it to say that this film was doomed from the beginning. The other actors of the movie are dancing circles around Shaq, and it's painful to try and see this basketball star get butchered on set with his monotone voice and expressionless faces. The few positives that I can give this movie is that they at least got most of the origins right. Because they hired Kenneth Johnson, a man who has gone on record saying that he hates comic books because he considers them to be childish and have very little stories to tell, even though his most famous forms of work include the 1970s adaptation of The Incredible Hulk, was able to work around the idea of having this superhero as he originally intended. And even though he's played by a basketball star, I will give credit that this cast is at least competent. Yes, even Shaq can pull off a competent performance, just don't put him up against anyone who's better than him. If I had to pick the major problems with the movie, it would be these two things. Number one is the story is bland and forgettable. Even though there are other movies that share the same problem, in the 90s we had movies like Spawn and Batman and Robin, which people still remember to this day, and that's because the writers and directors of those two movies knew how to make the characters interesting. This movie, on the other hand, was made to satisfy two elderly gentlemen who were complaining that there wasn't a more realistic superhero that kids could look up to. The second major problem is that this version of Steel has nothing at all to do with the original character. In the original comic, Steel became a hero because he looked up to Superman and wanted to help him whenever he wasn't around. This version of that same character is more like DC's equivalent to the BFG, a big guy who wants to help people because he made a boo-boo. I know that many people out there do consider other DC movies to be just as terrible. However, what makes those movies different is at one point people wanted to see those characters up on the big screen. We wanted a Catwoman movie. We wanted a Supergirl movie. And while those two are definitely bad movies, those either ended up bad because of the time period they came out, or because the producers took too long to make the movie. Steel is what I think of when no one asked for this, and what we ended up getting was someone's lazy attempt to hide his or her drug money. I give this movie a 3 out of 10. Only watch this movie if you want to make fun of it, or if you're a Shaq fan. And if you want to see better versions of this character, watch the episode of the Superman animated series titled Steel, or check out the animated movie, The Reign of the Supermen. They're a lot better than this piece of 90s vomit. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, 'cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night, everyone.